luck, 20% skill, 15% concentrated power of will, 5% pleasure, 50% pain, 100% reason to remember the name.
You'll add Robin Wauters, right?
All right, a little bit of patience because Jeff is checking in on Foursquare, so just a few minutes.
Nah, it's only going to be a minute.
All right, so thank you everyone for joining us today. As Pierre mentioned, my name is Robin Wauters. I'm the European editor for The Next Web. It's a leading technology blog. So we write about startups from all over the world. So I spend my days talking to entrepreneurs about their companies, which is a pretty good job. And I fly to lots of European countries and cities to, check out the local scene and the ecosystems. And so I have a pretty good life. So this is Jeff. Jeff's as Pierre mentioned, he's a venture investor, but he hasn't always been an investor. He was an entrepreneur. He's from France. Don't hold that against him. But he's from France. He studied in Paris here, and his the first company they worked for was already acquired. So that's getting off on the right foot. So can you share a little bit more about your professional background first?
Sure. So hi everyone. So I was born in Tours in the Loire Valley and moved to Paris when I was 20 to do an engineering degree. I had the opportunity to join a very early stage startup when I was in my second year as an intern, and ended up working with that startup through the internship, finishing my school and doing a DOA in parallel and working for the startup in my third year. That's when I learned about the fact that sleeping is really overrated. Then I did my army training in the Mountain Commandos, sniper specialty, which was pretty cool.
So watch out.
And ended up finally joining the startup full-time at the end of my army time, and became the CTO of the startup, and were acquired by Reuters. We were a financial services startup, were acquired in 1993, and I stayed through the acquisition and became one of the key tech guys of Reuters, managing very large teams in France, obviously, but also London, New York, and Palo Alto. And I moved to the dark side, as we call it. I became a VC in 2000 and moved to Dubai in 2000.
Was that a natural thing for you to do, being executive at Reuters, or was it just an opportunity?
It was. I really wanted to get the fuck out of France. And the first thing that seemed to be interesting and fun and different was becoming a VC in Palo Alto. And so the Palo Alto bit, I knew I wanted to do it. VC was actually very foreign to me because we had never raised any money, and or from VCs at least. And it was kind of interesting for me to jump into that completely unknown territory in a foreign context. And so I did it and learned the job of VC, on the spot.
So without going into too much detail, why did you leave France? Why did you want to leave France?
I think it was both sort of a personal goal, but also the feeling I had spent a lot of time in the Valley and in New York, and I just felt that this was something which would be really interesting for me to have exposure to the outside. And I thought the trigger for me was negotiating the 35-hour week for my shop in Paris. That really disgusted me because we were sort of a hard-working startup that had scaled. We had 300 people or something like that, and we're then constrained to get our engineers out the door so that they don't go over the 39 hours, otherwise we'd get fined or whatever. And it was just so stupid that I said, it's just the final straw, I'm out. And I think that completely randomly did I hear about this opportunity in the Reuters fund that was interested in my profile, because I was both technical and project management, product management, a bit of financials, very large team management. And so they wanted someone on the ground in Palo Alto that could help them manage their portfolio. The fund was based in London, but I became the partner in the US.
So would you, obviously you don't live in France anymore, but would you say that the situation has changed? Would you recommend French entrepreneurs to leave the country?
Well, I think it's, if you're ready to take the chance and have a way to get a visa in the US, which is unfortunately not as easy as it should be, I would say it's definitely worth the experience, because nothing is like what we have in the Valley in terms of an ecosystem. And Robin, you know that because you've been part of TechCrunch, and so you've seen that firsthand. There's no ecosystem like the Valleys, and therefore just spending a few months, a few years is a great opportunity. So I would encourage anyone to just be exposed to something different. It's always good to try and reset yourself, no matter what you do, no matter where you go. It's not easy, or it's actually quite completely impossible to find someone who's going to fund you to move. So either you move on your own, and very often I have people who ask me, but how do I do that? And if it's really sort of your own personal goal to leave abroad, to go to the Valley, the way to do it is to basically try and find a US company like a Facebook, a Twitter, a Microsoft, that will actually hire you, pay for your visa, sponsor you, get you over, and after a couple of years, you will become sort of local, because most of the people in the Valley, half of them speak English with a funny accent like mine, and they're not from there. They were not, they're foreigners. They come from India, China, Europe. It actually doesn't matter, because as soon as you're local and you have a local network, you can build a local company, and we don't think about the fact that you're coming from somewhere else, because it's what most people have done anyway. And so figuring out how to jumpstart your move to the US means that this is something that is really core to your personal aspiration, and that's one way to do it. Because I've never seen someone, an angel or a VC saying, yeah, sure, I'll pay for your move. Like, people, like, we only invest in the US, and we've invested in a bunch of different teams coming from Australia and France and Germany, and it doesn't matter. I don't even count. I don't even think about that when I think about the portfolio. And so it's feasible. It's just not easy.
But you did make some investments in Europe. I think Farmeron was one example in Croatia. Sure. Were those like just opportunities you couldn't pass on, or was it just a coincidence?
Well, just to give you the number, when I say that we don't invest in Europe, out of 132 investments I've made in the past 8.5 years, five are in Europe.
A small number, which is why I'm asking. Is it more a coincidence, or is it just because all the stars align?
Yeah, I think it's, in the case of Farmeron, it's a very unusual opportunity. It's a farming IT back office service in the cloud. And they help farmers, and it's not like the individual farmer, it's more the super farms, to manage their animals, because there's a lot of data to be captured. So it's really big data applied to farming. And it's not that we're interested in the space, because it's sort of unusual, but we met those dudes out of Croatia, and they have they're experts in farm management, and they're passionate about the space, and their software is priced per cows, which is pretty damn cool. And so we decided to invest, because I don't think there's that many opportunities like a Farmeron that we could have found in the US. So I think it's really the unique combination of the market opportunity, the founders, the passion, the everything, and damn, they're in Dubrovnik. And, we still invested. And
the fact that the CEO actually grew up on a farm, which is also a nice
absolutely.
detail. All right, so let's talk about your fund. The fund's called SoftTech VC. Mm-hmm. You're at your third fund now.
Yep.
I think you raised it close to a year ago, your third fund.
So it's a $55 million fund that we sort of announced and closed in January of this year. But we actually had been, we started raising it. So in the VC world, you cannot communicate about the fact that you're raising. It's forbidden by the SEC. And if ever you actually tweet about the fact that you're fundraising, you're in deep trouble. So we keep everything, on the cover, and we never talk about it. But we had actually started raising, a year and almost a year and a half, prior, and we had started warehousing deals. So SoftTech 3 really started making investments in September of 2010. So we've been at it for a bit more than a couple of years.
For those in the room that aren't terribly familiar with the way VC works, is that they spend a lot of time raising funds for their own funds. So they're not just investing, they're also raising funding from their partners.
Yeah, we know how hard it is to raise money.
Yeah, it takes up a lot of time and resources of yourself as well. So you're at a $55 million fund now. The previous fund was 15 million, is that correct? Why go from 15 to 55? What was the reasoning behind that?
Two reasons. One is because we actually could raise a larger fund. And second, so just to put things in context, so I was a VC, traditional VC from 2000 to 2004, part of a fund that had $450 million under management. Then in 2004, I left the fund to start SoftTech. And SoftTech really was, first and foremost, at the beginning, just a shell to manage my own investments, because I really moved back from being a VC to the business angel, sort of early stage focus that would really try and figure out whether Web 2.0, what has become Web 2.0, was actually for real. And at that time, not that many people were actually investing in those opportunities. My good friend Tony Conrad was actually one of the first investors in one of the icons of Web 2.0, which was the first acquisition Outpost. So yeah, Tony. And I thought there was actually a really interesting opportunity, and at that time you could count on your hands, two hands, the number of people who were actually doing those investments. And started investing in 2004, became sort of a super angel in 2006, which meant really that I was just a bit more crazy than the others, and there was like 12 or 13 of us.
And now it's a trend, but you were one of the first to actually...
And then in 2007, I raised one of the first micro VC funds. And at that time, I only raised 15 because that's what I could raise in 8 weeks. And put that together and created this fund which had 65 investments, which were sort of small in the 100 to 250 sort of K range. And then Fund 3 is really what I wanted to do when I grew up kind of thing, which is a fund that can actually $500,000 average in 60 companies and buy between 5 and 10% of the companies. And so we moved from a focus on access, getting into good deals, to ownership, buying enough of the companies that any outcome in any of the companies matters to the fund.
So let's talk a little bit about the entrepreneurs that you fund. You've made over 130 investments out of SoftTech so far, which is quite impressive. How many deals do you see in any given week or month, however you want to count them? So
it sort of varies, but we see thousands and thousands and thousands a year, and we say no 99.7% of the time.
So is it usually hard to say no, or is it just because it's a bad idea?
No, we're used to it. We would say no. I mean, by default, we say no. You approach us, by default, we say no. We have a big no, written on the forehead. And that's really so frustrating because sometimes there are opportunities and entrepreneurs that you really, really, really like, but at the end you're going to say no because they don't clear some of your hurdles, which are, either personal product opportunity, market opportunity, and so on and so forth. And
you're missing a great opportunity to talk about your 3 S's strategy. So go ahead.
So we have this thing called the 3 S's rule, which I came up with 5 or 6 years ago, which is a smart-ass team building a kick-ass product in a big-ass market. And those are really sort of the 3 components of what we look for in a lot of our deals. And very often, what a lot of companies will fail is to prove the big-ass market, which is very frustrating because at the beginning, it's very difficult to know whether something's going to, take off and be very successful and create a really big company. But to be honest, whenever we pass, we're right 99% of the time. Unfortunately, when we pass on a great opportunity and becomes a LinkedIn, which I passed on, and a bunch of others, Twilio, it sucks, but that's what we do.
You have to live with those as well. So you've talked to like thousands of entrepreneurs over the years. What makes a good or great founder different from a good founder or an average founder?
So First and foremost, we're going to try and figure out if there's a team there. We have backed solo entrepreneurs. One of my most successful outcomes, Mint, was a solo founder. He had built everything on his own, and Aaron Patzer is just an exceptional individual. And I think that we're trying to find this as part of a team. And so we're going to look at a number of components. First and foremost, we want to see sort of this deep passion that the founders are going to have about the startup they want to build. They have this sort of walk through walls attitude. And, you know, we say that's not going to succeed, and here are all the problems or whatever. And they just say, we don't care, this is how we're going to do it, we're going to try, and we're just going to put our life into this. And we want to see sort of that determination. We want to see the right mix of expertise and experience around the team. Typically, if you build something in the B2C space, you want to see, you know, someone who has at least some sensitivity around design, because if you don't have, you know, good design skills, it's going to be very difficult to be differentiated when you have 1 million, you know, apps on the App Store, or God knows how many services being started every day on the web. You want someone who's going to understand distribution, whether it's web distribution, whether it's mobile distribution. Without that, it's going to be really, really hard to scale. And then a very strong technical co-founder who can actually build the damn thing and scale it. And so we call that the 3Ds: design, development, distribution.
So you would say a three-person team on average would be the best choice, right?
That, I mean, whether 2, whether 3, we're fine with it. We just want to see the right, and you know, sometimes designer is not a co-founder, it's someone they've worked with. So what we want is sort of bench experience, and we've done as many first-time co-founders as we've done experienced co-founders. First-time entrepreneurs as we've done experienced entrepreneurs. It's just a matter of figuring that this team is just ripe for the opportunity, and you know, it's kind of challenging because we try and get the hard facts, but very often it will come down to gut. And the fact that, you know, sometimes you meet a team and you know they have this thing that you look for, and you know within 5 minutes that unless you really hear about something horrible in the due diligence, you'll fund them.
Have entrepreneurs matured from when you started investing in companies compared to now?
Matured in terms of individuals who became great entrepreneurs who were not, or changed in terms of...
Have they changed in the way that they do their first conversation with you, their first meeting?
Well, I think that one of the benefits of the VC bloggers is that we've, and I count myself as an early one. So in 2004, I started a blog around, you know, the VC activity I had. At that time, there were, you know, 3 or 4, David Hornick, Fred Wilson, who still blogs a lot, and Brad Feld, who still blogs a lot. And they were sort of the early guys who were trying to demystify this world of VC, which is very opaque. And at that time, there was still a lot of, you know, information imbalance, where we played the cards very close to our chest, and therefore founders didn't know how to pitch, founders didn't know how to raise money, you know, even what that meant. And now I think that there are enough resources out there, there are enough support networks of entrepreneurs that people are just better at doing it. However, it's surprising to me still how many people don't know the basics, like, you know, do your homework, prepare, you know, figure out who you should be pitching, and don't go and you know, mob any investor you can see at a conference because he might or she might not be the right person.
You actually wrote a pretty good blog post about getting stormed after you come off stage. Can you share some of those thoughts? Because I think they may be relevant for the audience as well.
Sure, and basically what I was saying is it's okay to, provided you assess that I was a potential investor for you, and by the way, I don't invest in Europe, remember. Well, most likely I won't invest in Europe. It's okay to give your business card and say, I will be sending you an email about my company, so-and-so who you know has recommended that I reach out to you. And make sure that I sort of just remember the fact that you handed a business card to me. And if you want my business card, that's fine. But trying to pitch me on the spot is just not a good use of your time, because at the end of the day, we get tens of opportunities a week, sometimes hundreds. And, that means an inbox which is full of unreads, and we're going to pick the opportunities which are forwarded to us by people we trust. And so the most important thing you try and do is to figure out who knows you and knows me. And so LinkedIn is your best friend, and can therefore send me an email with your plan and introduction saying, hey, here is this entrepreneur who I know, and this is how I know him or her. And I think that what they're doing is actually pretty interesting. You should take a look, or do you want to take a look? And if I say yes, then they will make the intro. Those are the rules of engagement. Thanks to that, you'll be on top of the pile as opposed to the middle or the bottom. Because guess what? The guys who get the strong intros get the meeting. The guys in the middle, if they're lucky and I have room in my calendar, might get the meeting, and the people at the bottom, won't. And so the cold calls, the emails we get without this intro, unfortunately, always float at bottom. And in 8.5 years, I actually have never, ever, ever invested in something which was a cold call.
It's all very clear. So for the past few months, I've had the opportunity to work as a consultant with the European Commission. And what we're trying to do is get a sense of why problems with the European startup ecosystem are fewer startups, fewer big ones, and a lack of growth capital, both in the very early stage and at a later stage. And one of the first thing I mentioned was entrepreneurial culture. Mm-hmm. The fact that it's lacking a lot in most European countries. Do you think that, and this is a question that's relevant to the venue we're in, do you think education can play a huge role in changing that in Europe?
Well, education obviously has a huge role, but I think it has a huge role because of the richness of experiences that education can provide. To me, at the end of the day, it's a culture issue. The big challenge in Europe is the fact that if you fail, this is something that is going to have a big impact on you as a person in your social life, and people just don't accept failure easily, which means that by definition they're not ready to take major risk or major risks, because if they fail, it's going to be a big problem, a big challenge. And it goes as far as having countries that don't have the concept of limited liability companies. And so if I'm Spanish or I'm Irish and I lose the money of an investor, I'm going to be, essentially stuck with that debt that I'm going to have to reimburse. So it's VC, venture capital in Spain or in Ireland for, I understand, those kinds of companies, is just not real sort of VC, because by definition, you're on the hook to pay back the investor no matter what. And so at the end of the day, if Europe wants to compete and be, first and foremost, never try to compete with Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is 40 years old. It's just this unique combo of talent, Berkeley and Stanford, money, and this willingness of just do anything in a very, very big and splashy way. And if ever we fail, it's fine. It can be very public, but you have entrepreneurs who have had massive failures who just go back up and do something else and raise money, and here we go again. No one sort of has that. So try and invent your own way of doing things. And to me, it's based on a community of successful entrepreneurs who try and help, the next generation. People are ready to take, risk with their cash. And, that's what business angels would typically do, which means that you need to have a tax code that facilitates that, and not the stupidity that the French government has tried to impose. But I think they're getting back, backtracking out of that, and accept that being an entrepreneur is one of the most awesome sort of job you can ever hope for. It's actually not a job; it's a passion. And if ever you fail, it's fine. You'll learn. And unless the culture actually changes to accept that, it will be sort of challenging. Right. But it's not impossible. I think there has been tremendous progress made over the past few years. Certainly, when I told my father that I was going to work for a startup, sort of said, "Your mother and I," and whenever he started with "your mother and I," it was serious. "Your mother and I thought that you would have a real job because you had good grades." I was like, what the fuck does that mean? He said, well, you know, real job means working for Thomson or EDF or, you know, name your favorite French company, a big company, and work for life, right? That's what my father-in-law did. He worked for Schneider for his entire life. And, you know, I would just shoot myself if I was even some thinking and projecting myself in that context. But that's what our sort of families sort of grew up with.
Yeah. My parents are exactly the same. So we're actually out of time, but we wanted to have some time for questions from the audience. Do we have an extra mic? We don't? I'll give you mine. So if anyone has a question, please stand up and tell us who you are.
Yeah, and another thing, and I hope you guys sort of do as much in English as possible, but it's fine to have the French accent, it works very well with the girls, but, you know, being proficient in English really, really matters.
Thank you, Jeff and Robin. So anybody has a question in the room?
Yes, my question is, when do we have to come to show you a business plan? Do we have to have already launched an MVP? And how many users on this MVP do you need to invest? I know in Paris it's around 60,000. Do you have any number?
So we almost never invest on a concept unless we know the entrepreneur, like repeat entrepreneurs will back them, who have made money to us will back them without even, well, we'll ask what they do, but you know, we'll back them before actually having seen the product. But otherwise, because we have so many opportunities coming our way, yes, we look for something which is an MVP, minimum viable product, or very close to an MVP. In terms of, there's not a hard number, because it really depends on the application or the service and so on and so forth. We just want a proof that you figured out that it's a product that people want to use, that it solves a specific, you know, real life problem as opposed to something that you wish they were experiencing. That you figured out a way to, you know, drive user adoption or user acquisition. So that can be as simple as, you know, buying some keywords on Google or Facebook and just getting people to a sign-up page where they leave their email. So there's a lot you can do, you know, in sort of lean startup land that allows us to get comfortable that you might not have the answers, but you're asking the right questions. And so to us, I mean, don't think about an investment process as a set of gates. Think about it as a scale on which you're going to put a bunch of different weights. And if we see that you really know about user acquisition and retention, which is, by the way, the most important in the mobile world, then, you know, it will be sort of a weight of a pretty large size. And therefore, we might not need as many users to prove that you could actually drive some adoption, retention, potential referrals, inviting people, and so on and so forth. And, you know, after a while, and you've put a bunch of weight on the scale will tip and will invest. So there's no hard numbers, but you have to understand all the components that make us, you know, want to dig more and eventually make a positive decision.
Other question in the room?
So you mentioned how an exceptional ecosystem Silicon Valley is. What would you recommend to a French company that is getting started, thinks meets the requirements you mentioned? Should they try and move over as soon as they can, or should maybe they make a proof of concept in Europe and then move over?
It really depends as to, I mean, one of the issues that some French startups have is that they really focus on the French market. And yes, you know, it's a large market, but it's not a big enough market. You can build tremendous companies just in Europe. And the good news is that Europe is actually a market that scares US investors and entrepreneurs. And typically, when we build a company, I mean, they start talking about Europe when they're 4 or 5 years old, and they've really established a pretty strong footprint in the US. Fab.com is sort of a counterexample where, because of the Summer Brothers, you know, doing a knockoff site of Fab, sort of became faster than we had planned originally. And, you know, we bought Casacanda, and now the because Jason, the CEO, said the fab will be, you know, for 18. We're deriving a pretty large percentage of revenue from Europe. So you could definitely build a very strong footprint in Europe and then move to the US. Otherwise, because what you have to understand is that you might have and enjoy a unique position in Europe as the sole player there, and if you move to the US, you'll get in the arena and you might have 4 or 5 other startups fighting it. So I think there is a very strong message here. You guys can build big companies in Europe if you have the guts to do it.
A question?
Hi. When you were speaking, you were making a lot of effort to say him and her and make it both gender. I know that we have a lot of women in the room, and I know that with all the movement 2.0, girls in web, that it's getting more important to have girls and women getting involved into entrepreneurship. Could you tell us about that and how you would like to be involved as a VC?
So I made I was asked a similar question at a Fireside chat in Berkeley, and I basically said, look, we invest in people who are kick-ass, and whether they have boobs or not doesn't really matter to us. And it's really sort of the way we think about it. We have exceptional women in the portfolio. I have, you know, we're a team of 4. We have 2 gals, 2 dudes, and I have one of the only sort of African-American partners on my team, my partner Charles. But I don't think about it. Those are just exceptional people I wanted to work with, and gender, race, religion, whatever, doesn't matter. We find it tremendously important to have women. Women sort of bring a complete facet of skill set, experience. We like to have women co-founders, and sometimes recently, especially on the e-commerce side, we've actually backed 2 or 3 women founders, which is great. So I think my Steph works with me, said the other day on the panel that she just wishes that at some point soon in the future she won't feel that she's the token woman on the panel. She will just be there because she kicks ass. And so we really try and push for diversity, which is why we say he's or her, because we think about that. That's sort of culturally present. And I just wish there were more women involved in startups. Absolutely. But does that mean that we'll lower the bar for women co-founders? No way. Same bar, same expectations, as hard. I'm actually, in the process of firing a woman founder, and that's not easy, but, I'll do it, and I have absolutely no PD because she's a woman.
Other question, maybe?
Can you do that?
Of course I can. So that was a really bad answer because I know a lot of guys who have boobs as well. So, unfortunately.
I just pictured that. That's
one of the things that I didn't get into the 20 minutes we had is when companies fail, what's the primary reason that you're seeing in your portfolio when they fail? What's the main reason companies fail, startups?
So most often they have failed to demonstrate that they were building a business or a product which was of enough significance that someone else is going to fund them. So there is this food chain of funding that we do the seed, then you have the Series A done by typically one firm raising 5, 6, 8 million. Then there is another round which is bigger, and eventually the company has to build a real business, and at some point they generate revenue, and eventually enough revenues to be cash flow break even, and they don't need to be funded anymore. And somewhere, somehow, there is a failure to just prove to the next guy that they're worthy of another investment. However, in the recent 6 to 12 to 18 months, since it feels like the Valley has really doubled or tripled the number of startups being launched, we find ourselves facing just good old execution issues, meaning they're just not able to build or scale or just get the damn thing to work, in which case it's not even a question of proving that you can build a footprint. It's just that you totally failed at building your startup. And to me, that's something which is new. And I sort of point to the fact that there are so many startups that sometimes people make trade-offs, bringing in engineers or product people who are not top-notch, who are not as good as they should be, just because they want bums on seats. And that's really sort of a consequence of this craziness around all the startups which are being started, I think.
All right, thank you very much. We're out of time, so thank you very much for your attention. I hope it was fruitful.
Thank you and good luck.